So you saw the thumbnail of the video and the title, so you probably know what this is going to be about. Was Godzilla vs. Hulk from Death Battle even good? Now, a lot of people are probably going to be assuming I'm going to say it's not because, well, Godzilla lost. My channel is like 99% Godzilla at this point. No, Godzilla losing isn't going to be a major problem here for me, as I went in expecting him to lose, as from scaling of both characters. Unless you composite Godzilla, he doesn't really have too much of a shot, and even when composited, it could really go either way. My problem with this whole video isn't really with the animation itself or anything like that, it's more so how Godzilla is researched here. I'm not saying with better research Godzilla would have won. In fact, I would actively bet against him winning against Hulk no matter how you really slice it. Unless you bring up Marvel scaling, which is a whole nother thing. But even with that, I still think it's a lot closer than some people act like it would be. Regardless, I just think Godzilla wasn't done justice here. And I feel like they definitely tried to make it seem like he had no win cons, when realistically he should have had a couple if they truly composited him like they said they would. Once again, I'm going to continue to say this throughout the video, because Hulk fans really seem to assume that you think Godzilla would win if you think Godzilla wasn't done justice here, because they get emotional over Hulk's little losing streak he had on a fan-made YouTube series. No, I don't think Godzilla would win. Now, do I think he could win? Yeah, absolutely, if they would have composited him right. Do I think he would have won under Death Battle's format, or even throughout a actual crossover fight? Not really. So, no, I'm not saying Godzilla wins. That's not the point of this video. I'm not saying Death Battle is bad because they researched Godzilla wrong and it gave him a loss. I'm saying Death Battle is not researching very well here for Godzilla. And there's a bunch of reasons why. Now, for Hulk section, I'm sure there might be inaccuracies there too, but I'm only really good at scaling, well, not really good, but okay at scaling DC, particularly DC in the post-crisis era. There I know the most about from DC. So, you're not going to see me trying to correct Death Battle on Marvel scaling, especially since most people seem to agree that Hulk scaling was okay here. Godzilla's scaling is the only one that got kind of hated on. And there are some issues with the animation, but those aren't the animator's fault. That's more so whoever made the storyboard or whoever was researching Godzilla. As the animator, I believe it was Dev Artemis for this, did an amazing job on the animation. The animation is extremely well done, and I'm not going to hate on that at all. And for what they gave Godzilla, the outcome is correct within the episode. If this for what they gave Godzilla here. As this fight was supposed to be Hulk versus a composite Godzilla, as that's pretty much what they'd been hinting at since the start. But they really didn't composite Godzilla here, and I'll explain why. So, starting off with Hulk section, I don't know enough about Marvel to really say they did anything wrong. I know some basic Marvel scaling from some friends of mine, and most of them generally agree that if it was any singular version of Godzilla, Hulk would win, and most Godzilla scalers, myself included, agree with this sentiment. So, moving on from that one, we get to Godzilla's section. And Godzilla's section is where my problems start popping up. For starters, there's the very obvious elephant in the room, Godzilla and Hell being only planetary according to them. I don't like that. Now, sure, there are different statements from the multitude of writers that worked on it that have very conflicting information on how the series even went. Some people think he did kill the God Mountain. Other people think the God Mountain wasn't even a god. Other people think he just shot the portal, which is what the art actually seems to kind of hint at. But regardless, there's so many different interpretations, you can't really say one is wrong, as all of these statements are 100% official. And IDW seems to support all of them in different ways. So, regardless, I think that they should have at least brought up some higher ends for that planetary feat right there, as there are arguments for it being an infinite realm. There are arguments for him being at least, like, multiversal. Not, like, extremely high, just, like, stupid levels multiversal, but at least multiversal. I do not think they should have brought up some of the higher wank ends for Godzilla and Hell, obviously. Some people think he's out-of-versal. Some people think he upscales Toho's cosmology, too. And other people think he upscales all of IDW. Quite frankly, those interpretations are not very well backed in comparison to some of the mid-end ones. And while some people definitely support them, most of the time they can't back it very well without ignoring other statements that directly contradict it that are just as official and just as valid in a debate. So, well, I definitely think they downplayed Godzilla in Hell. I don't think Godzilla in Hell would have won Godzilla the fight or really changed too much to begin with, as he doesn't give too much to Godzilla outside, obviously, basically immortality. And some decent, like, hacks abilities, but nothing that the other Godzillas wouldn't already have. A general power boost to his base would be useful, as at least in base form, Godzilla in Hell is one of the strongest Godzillas out there, if not the strongest in base. At least on a consistent end, but it wouldn't have really changed the outcome of the fight too much, in my opinion, even if they did give him the insane stuff, as they were still having Godzilla beat Hulk at fights, despite, well, before he went Ultima mode, despite them having Godzilla as, like, planetary at best, apparently, before he went Ultima. Another thing I don't really like about Godzilla's section is the speed part. They really just get him around like FTL plus to MFTL off flight speeds from the Showa era mainly. The problem with this is that there's actively far better feats of speed repeatedly throughout the Godzilla series. Like infinite speed feats are pretty common. And there are showings of immeasurable speed as well in both the Mothra Leo, Mothra trilogy, and the Orochi the Nine-Headed Dragon film, which is canon to the Heisei era and thus canon to the Godzilla timeline. So, why they didn't use those, I don't know. My best guess would be either they don't think those are canon, in the same way they don't think the Marvel Godzilla crossovers are canon, even though those are, or they assume that that wouldn't scale to Godzilla, even though there are several official guides that pretty much confirm that they do scale to Godzilla one way or another, with Mothra Leo's speed being compared to Space Godzilla's, who Godzilla fought, and Godzilla just basically stated by Toho to be strong enough to beat Orochi in a fight in an official magazine around the time of Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. So, yeah, I think they should have used those for speed. I don't think it would have changed much, as Hulk has had speed feats around that level for decades now. I don't know too much about Marvel scaling, but I've seen some feats he has. He's definitely faster. The only way you could even argue Godzilla matches his speed is if you think the Infinite Heat Ray also boosts up Godzilla's speed, but nothing really supports that. And the Infinite Heat Ray is something they don't even mention in this fight, so it wouldn't have mattered in that animation to begin with, as they really just said Red Spiral Ray and nothing else. They kind of show burning for 2 seconds on 2 different occasions, but the only thing we get is that it would have caused a nuclear winter, which isn't even consistent within the film itself, as in the film simulation it was going to melt down to the Earth's core and destroy it, and then in the original Japanese film they mentioned it would have caused a Big Bang. So, no, it wouldn't have just caused a nuclear winter. I'm not sure where that came from, actually. But we'll move on from that, I guess. Something I forgot to mention for the speed section. For the Orochi film, some people have developed this misconception about the birds in that film that the immeasurable speed comes from. The them traveling through cracks in time thing, though the guide that states this doesn't explain how that works, it's most likely working the exact same way that Mechagodzilla's time travel works, which is the same thing. He breaks through the timeline through a crack in time that he forms. In order to do that, you have to be able to travel into the higher world, which is something within the Godzilla cosmology they don't really mention here, which makes sense as it's barely mentioned in Godzilla itself, but it is definitely canon to the Heisei era and the Orochi films. The higher world is something above space-time and all that, and in order to even get there, you have to literally break space and time to get in there. It's kind of like a weaker version of the Speed Force in a way. So it should still be immeasurable speed. Even if you don't buy that, Mothra Leo has immeasurable speed, and then light speed in Godzilla is just immeasurable speed, as stated in that film. And this has remained consistent throughout all films connected to the Mothra trilogy. Of course, you don't have to buy the whole cracks in space-time are immeasurable speed, as the higher world is admittedly very vague. All we know is it's transcendent over the base cosmology. So, just like a higher dimensional plane. Something similar to Void Ghidorah's Void. But even if you don't buy that, there's still multiple ways to get Godzilla to immeasurable speed. And if you don't want to believe Godzilla's immeasurable speed, there's multiple ways for infinite speed. If you don't want to buy that, just go off what Death Battle had, I guess. Regardless, Godzilla's not faster than Hulk, but he's definitely faster than they give him credit for here. So, the animation itself also seems to also make him faster than he should be, as he's keeping up with Hulk at points, despite them saying that Hulk should be faster. Now, for the immortality part, there's something that they definitely forgot, and that is Rage Across Time Godzilla. Despite not being anywhere near the strongest Godzilla ever, he's definitely in the top 10 or 20, but he's not the strongest Godzilla ever by any means. He by far has the best regeneration. As a direct statement from the writer basically stated that when Zeus kills him, quote unquote, he erases him entirely from existence, his soul and everything, and Godzilla just comes back. They don't explain how. They don't even mention how. They just say he can just do that. And this is when Godzilla was weakened and basically out of power. So, yeah, that's some pretty absurd, immortality there. Now, I'm sure there's something in the comics that has Hulk being able to beat that. The Green Door does kind of act in a similar way. But the fact that Godzilla can just come back from anything like a Toon Force character is definitely something that should have been brought up, unless they just missed that statement. Another thing they don't bring up, another thing they kind of state that doesn't make any sense is that Ultima is every Godzilla in every timeline, which isn't really well backed. There are arguments for this are both cameos from other Godzillas and other characters from Godzilla in a post-credit scene, I believe, or an episode ending. I don't remember what it was, but it's just little cameos, little Easter eggs. That doesn't prove anything really. And then another thing they bring up is references to events from past films within Singular Point as well, which, okay, the novel has some stuff that kind of backs this, but they didn't use the novel, they used the anime. And the novel Ultima is stronger than the anime one. And a lot of the arguments they use for Ultima from the anime is actually pulling from the novel, which they said they weren't using because they keep mentioning anime. I don't know. Regardless, though, they act like Ultima is just composite Godzilla already, which is never confirmed. Though there are hints that that might be true, it's never been to 100% stated, and most people don't actually believe that. And even if he was, he would still scale higher than they had him. But the way they had him already, off of the feats they were giving him, strictly Ultima stuff basically, was already higher than he should be, which is very strange. They had Ultima at infinite dimensional, basically. In the anime, they just state he's fourth dimensional in his true form. They say that on the screen, just outright. He's 4D. And then Death Battle even kind of mentions that with their comparisons here. In the novel, there's arguments for him being anywhere from 15D all the way to infinite D. I more so agree with the 15D and around that general ballpark stuff. Though the infinite D stuff is kind of back to a degree. I just don't find it very consistent with what's being shown in the novel, but whatever, it's kind of up for interpretation. It's a very confusing book to begin with. Regardless, though, they were using novel Ultima's high ends for anime Ultima's stuff, which doesn't make sense to me, but whatever. Another thing they don't bring up is the transformations that they do mention. They show Super Godzilla and Burning Godzilla, and then just never have them show up in the fight. Since they mentioned the fight took days, I feel like at least one would show up at some point. Especially if Godzilla is growing in power throughout the fight, as many Godzillas have combat evolution, like Final Wars. IDW Godzilla literally get tens of times stronger throughout fights. This is something that's fairly consistent in both the Final Wars film and the IDW comics. I feel like Godzilla would have at least got a transformation in that fight, but I guess they didn't want to make another model for an Ultima model that they've never seen a transformation like that. I don't know. Another thing that's kind of random to me is they didn't give Godzilla all of his abilities either. They show a decent amount, like Gemstone Godzilla's strange version of the Pulse, where he can essentially send himself flying. They do show a version of Shin's Tail Beam. They show the Red Spiral Ray, and what I believe is the Kizar version of the Red Spiral Ray at one point. They show Archetype, obviously. They show a lot of stuff, but they don't show everything Godzilla has. There's definitely a lot that was left out that could have changed the fight. Oh yeah, they also show the Pulse. Because a lot of Godzilla's abilities, that even ones they mention, just don't pop up in the fight. That's kind of strange to me, but whatever. Another thing I feel they don't really showcase a lot is how busted a combination of Godzillas could be. Though I understand giving Godzilla stuff that he's never shown on screen would be kind of strange, when you mix a bunch of versions of a character together, they're going to be capable of doing things that the prior versions couldn't do due to restraints that they now don't have. For instance, Shin Godzilla. Shin Godzilla is fairly weak for a Godzilla. Most calculations have him at like town level at best. He drains out of power fairly easily. There are some people who think he's solar system level for some reason. I laughed when I saw that, so that should tell you how I feel about that one. There are arguments to get into like mountain levels and even like country levels and stuff, but I mean, most of them are not the greatest. Regardless, that wouldn't help against Hulk to begin with. Even the solar system stuff wouldn't, and that's like wink. But if you give Shin Godzilla infinite energy, coupled with how absurd his adaptation and regeneration is, Godzilla is going to be a beast, especially even like Heisei Godzilla is basically infinite energy, as well as how he acts as a character. I mean, think about how Shin Godzilla's regeneration works. It requires energy. The more energy he has, the faster it works. So if Hulk was to split Godzilla into pieces, like he pretty much does in multiple parts of this fight, every singular drop of blood is potential becoming another Godzilla in the same way Lobo's regeneration works. And those Godzillas would be just as strong as the originals. That's how Shin's stuff works. And Shin can also basically mimic the DNA of others, slowly mimicking Hulk's own abilities throughout the fight. I don't think this would make him win by any means, but a Godzilla that could do stuff like that would certainly make the animation a lot less one-sided. It would certainly make the ending make a lot more sense, as Godzilla's just kind of standing there and letting Hulk punch him repeatedly, which is kind of odd. But ignoring that, they also don't mention stuff like, Heisei Godzilla potentially being able to absorb gamma. Now, I know some people are going to say, well, how could Heisei Godzilla absorb gamma? The same way Hulk could probably absorb archetype if he really wanted to. Both can absorb stuff that Death Battle themselves say are pretty similar. Now, some people are probably like, well, Heisei Godzilla doesn't have archetype, so how could he absorb something like archetype? Well, he absorbs supergravity, which is literally like the same thing as archetype within the Godzilla universe. It functions very similarly and acts very similarly. He absorbs power from Space Godzilla, who's a very similar character to Ultima, at least ignoring the true form stuff. And characters that use the same stuff as Space Godzilla, like Void Ghidorah, are literally just like a Ghidorah version of Ultima in a way. So, yeah, I'd say characters like Heisei Godzilla, maybe even Showa Godzilla, have the potential to potentially just absorb gamma, the same way Hulk could probably absorb archetype and Godzilla's own higher dimensional radiation, which is something I feel would have made the fight a lot cooler, as you potentially be getting some unique new abilities for the characters, like maybe Hulk mimics Godzilla's atomic breath through absorbing his energy, or learns to use archetype the same way he uses gamma, getting some like strange reality warping red form. Maybe Godzilla ends up hulking out like he did in that one not canon crossover, or at least to my knowledge not canon compared to the main canon Marvel stuff. There's a whole lot of stuff that they could have had in this animation that would have made sense if they would have done a true composite Godzilla that we kind of missed out on. And then there's another thing that a lot of people have been arguing about after this fight, and even before it, and that's if they were going to use the Marvel crossovers that are considered canon to Marvel and Toho. Meaning not the ones that aren't considered canon, as there are a couple that, to my knowledge, aren't considered canon, and probably shouldn't be considered canon, because they would destroy the canon Marvel Godzilla timeline if they were. Regardless, though, yeah, they claim they're not canon, which is wrong. They're stated canon by Toho and Marvel, pretty much, so, okay. Some people have also just lied and said that Death Battle doesn't use crossovers in their scaling, which is wrong. Watch Scooby-Doo vs. Courage, you'll see one used in their scaling as a major plot point for both characters. They even use stuff that isn't even a full crossover, like statements from Warner Bros. About Tom and Jerry, to prove that Tom and Jerry could probably be affected by the Toonie DNA dissolver or whatever. They used a statement from that to back that, a statement from a company that doesn't even, like, it's strange. Anyways, yeah, they use all sorts of stuff like crossovers. They even used a crossover in Godzilla's like scaling here with the frost breath that they don't even show in the animation, saying it could slam through dimensions. They used a crossover for that, one that arguably is even canon. Well, I believe it is canon to that series. I don't think it's canon to Toho. It's very strange. And then they also mention like random one-off stuff a lot as like little gags in it. I mean, sure, they aren't using that for the scaling, but like they also mention the way that Ultima works is he could appear in all these different universes, and also implying that he's appearing in all the crossovers, as they claim that, like, Frost Godzilla was Ultima. And since the Marvel crossover is canon, and has been canon since the 70s, that would mean that would also be Ultima by their logic, which I don't personally believe, but that's what they would have to go off of, as that's what they said. I don't understand why some crossovers are used and others aren't. I guess this, I mean, I could see why they might not want to use the Marvel crossover, for the simple reason that you'd be using Marvel scaling for a character that isn't Marvel to fight a Marvel character, but at the same time, didn't they do that same thing for Courage vs. Scooby? Regardless, I don't even think Marvel Godzilla, as of now, even with all those hacks, consistently beats Hulk. I definitely think he can, and he might, and there's definitely ways he could. He definitely out-hacks his Hulk if it's a composite. Especially if they go off how they think Ultima works, then there is actually an argument for Godzilla winning fairly easily. But, again, I don't buy Ultima being Marvel Godzilla, or most Godzillas, as their main argument is connections to some of the films. Even though we have official timelines from Toho that show a lot of films aren't connected on the same timeline at all. Like, Final Wars shouldn't be part of Ultima, as it's not even connected to the original film, which is why most statements for, like, Kiza Ghidorah being the strongest Ghidorah, or that Godzilla being the strongest Godzilla, people take out of context, because most of those are referring strictly to that singular timeline, not the connected timelines that it doesn't have. It's strange. The Godzilla timeline is very different. A lot of stuff's connected, but a lot of stuff isn't. It's kind of a mess, if I'm being honest, but Toho has official timelines that kind of disprove them all being connected, as a lot of them just simply aren't. Ultimately, my biggest problem with the Godzilla scaling in this video is it hinges entirely on a theory about Ultima that isn't really backed up, and ignores a lot of what they said they were going to have in this video. They mention stuff to just disregard it later. They just say some stuff isn't canon despite it being canon, and then they kind of go back on some of their own rules from prior videos. They said they were going to have Godzilla at his peak, and they didn't give us that. They gave us a strange Godzilla that's just Ultima with a weird pre-Ultima form. It's odd to me. Now, do I think that Death Battle purposely did this just to make things wrong and to make Hulk win easier? Not really. Do I think they did this because they didn't like how some Godzilla scaling is hinged on statements other than on-screen feats? Absolutely. I think what Death Battle did is they saw that a lot of Heisei, Showa, all that, a lot of these, like, speed feats and stuff, is based a lot in the guidebooks and not the official not the official films themselves. Even though a lot of these things are referenced in the films, though. And they probably just said, not consistent enough, we're not using it, which is strange, because they said they read the guidebooks themselves. Which I find odd, to me, personally. I don't think, again, I'm going to continue to say this throughout the video, I don't think Godzilla would have won even composited. Though I definitely think he could have, and I could see him winning. The more I think about it, I think there's a pretty decent chance he could. I don't think he 100% just destroys Hulk, blows him into nothingness instantly with, like, no difficulty or anything. Hulk is stronger than any singular version of Godzilla. Anyone that thinks otherwise doesn't know Hulk. I don't even know Hulk that well, and off the few feats I've seen and the few conversations I've had with Hulk scalers, yeah, I know who wins this if it's a singular version of Godzilla. Heisei isn't touching Hulk, and even Godzilla is as strong as, like, True Form Ultima in the novel, and Godzilla in Hell aren't doing much to Hulk. Even if you rank Godzilla in Hell to being above all of IDW, he's not beating Hulk because IDW is a megaverse and doesn't have infinite dimensions. Whereas Marvel, by itself, in one universe, is arguably bigger. Which is pretty absurd to even state, but that's kind of how the scaling works. Now, Composite Godzilla is a completely different animal than any singular version of Godzilla, and I feel like that's something Hulk fans don't really understand. A Composite Godzilla is not just a composite of one character, it's a composite of so many different versions of the same idea that it becomes something else entirely. Something that's pretty consistent with Godzilla is that he fights stuff stronger than himself all the time and ends up stronger than that thing. That's a major thing of Godzilla. Look no further in Godzilla vs. Destroyer, Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla. Pretty much any time Godzilla's fought Ghidorah in any continuity, especially the Showa era, And you're going to see this. Godzilla's not the Goliath to the David here. It's Godzilla would be the David versus the Goliath against Hulk, despite the obvious size change here. Godzilla's used to fighting things stronger than himself. Hulk is too, but Hulk also just ends up getting stronger naturally through rage, whereas Godzilla gets stronger through a whole lot of different methods that when combined become, in my opinion, more potent than Hulk's anger amps. Now, does that mean I think Godzilla composite beats Hulk for I think 7th time now? No. I don't think he beats Hulk, at least not consistently. But I do think I would have preferred to see a real composite Godzilla, as they said they were going to use, than what we got. As this video was essentially Ultima with a spicy first form versus Hulk, just normal Hulk. It wasn't like a composite Godzilla like they were hyping it up to be in the research and the previews and all that, versus like Hulk at his best, which is something I just find strange and kind of underwhelming. Again, the animation's great. I'm sure the researchers did a lot to make this fight. The research wasn't horrible everywhere. I'm sure they definitely worked hard on this. The editing for the research sections is really well done. Obviously, there was effort put into this. I'm not taking any of that away. But like many fights this season, it's kind of underwhelming to see a fight that we were told was going to be composite Godzilla vs. Hulk end up just being Ultima vs. Hulk. Now, on to some other stuff about the animation. Again, I don't dislike the animation at all. Devil Artemis did a really good job on this. There just are a couple gripes I have. Why does Godzilla just stand there and let Hulk punch him? He has a pulse. He has tons of stuff that could get Hulk off of him, especially under Death Battle's logic. Why is Godzilla so little when he starts off? I know it's probably to make the animation easier, but why is he at -1's height when -1 is one of the shortest Godzillas? It just seems strange to me. Why does Godzilla only use the red spiral ray in his -1 style form and not in the Ultima form when it's a stronger attack and he clearly had access to it already? There's a lot of stuff that I just don't get. Why is the back beams not used on Hulk when he's trying to jump on his back? There's some stuff that I don't really understand here. Of course, the animation's still amazing, but there's just some they kind of make Godzilla seem dumb in this fight, which isn't too uncommon. A lot of people think Godzilla is just an animal. He doesn't think. But if you watch the old Toho films, you'd know that couldn't be further from the truth. Godzilla is pretty much as intelligent as a human when he wants to be. And in comics, he's arguably smarter at points. Sure, he's not usually speaking English or speaking Japanese, even though he does in the show era a couple times. And in his comics, he implies that he can understand some human speech. But he's still extremely intelligent. And, he's not as smart as Banner by any means, but he's still smart enough to know what Hulk is doing and react to it. He's still smart enough to come up with a plan. Showa Godzilla in particular came up with a lot of plans. The guy was definitely a strategist, despite acting like a goofball half the time when he wasn't destroying cities. So, though I definitely think the animation has its flaws, it's still a good animation for what it is. It's Godzilla in his Ultima form versus Hulk. And yeah, I think Hulk beats Ultima even with the infinite dimensional stuff for pretty much the same reasons they stated for the most part. But I do think there's a couple other reasons that Hulk wins. I won't get into that though, as most of them would be more fair to use against an actual composite Godzilla, as he doesn't really need them here. But yeah, the question of if this death battle was actually good, I think it depends on what you mean. Was there a lot of effort put into it? Was the editing good? Was the animation definitely entertaining? Was the voice acting well done? Did the video look and seem entertaining and was good on that end? Yeah, absolutely. It was a good video if you're going off of that. If you just want to watch a fight between Godzilla and Hulk, it's not a bad video at all. Was it good on the research? For Hulk, yeah, for the most part, it seemed pretty good, and I haven't seen any people really complain about it. Including people I know were definitely acting like they were going to downplay Hulk again. As far as Hulk death battles go, this was Hulk's best death battle for how he is as a character. They got him right this time. They didn't really do that in the last two, especially with Broly. But what about Godzilla. This was Godzilla's worst death battle by a pretty significant margin, and this is saying a lot considering they've had Godzilla on 2 times before, just like Hulk, with Godzilla vs. Gamera, where they for some reason used Marvel scaling. Like, actually, they used Godzilla fighting Thor as a feat. They mentioned that in the video. And then they used Kiryu, who a lot of people are going to be like, no, that's Mechagodzilla. It's the original Godzilla's soul, and a Mechagodzilla is technically Godzilla. I'd still consider it Godzilla over Mechagodzilla, as Mechagodzilla is just a Mechagodzilla. And this is Godzilla brought back as a mech. They're not really different characters. It's just the original Godzilla. It's like saying GMK isn't Godzilla because he's brought back from the dead. Regardless, in that fight against the Dragon Zord, they did the opposite thing they did here. Kiryu was done really well. Dragon Zord was done really poorly. Dragon Zord should have won that fight pretty easily. I know some people are going to disagree, especially people that really like Kiryu, but I can pretty easily explain why Dragon Zord should win that. Regardless, though, yeah, this was like a reverse of that death battle. Both have really good animations. Both generally get the characters right for most of the scaling until they get to like the latter half. But both kind of fall off for one character scaling. This is very much Godzilla's Hulk vs. Broly. And Hulk fans seem to not get that, because every time you mention Godzilla wasn't done justice here, they assume you think Godzilla would win. No, we're just saying that they said they were going to use a composite Godzilla and they didn't. We're saying they used Ultima versus a guy he could never beat. They didn't make it a fair fight like they claimed they were going to. They didn't use composite Godzilla. And they didn't use Marvel scaling despite having him on the goddamn thumbnail. It's just strange to me. So with all that said, do I think this death battle was good in general? It's okay. I didn't say it's like grand or anything, but it's not bad. There's worse death battles. There's worse videos, definitely. Do I think it's good? No. I don't think it's good. I don't think it's bad either. I just think it's meh. Kind of underwhelming, not grand. I'm sure other people think it's a really good death battle, or like the best of the season and all that. And for a Hulk fan, it probably is, because they disrespected Hulk on Death Battle so much, it's become a meme. But for Godzilla fans, do I think it's an actually good thing to watch? Not really. I mean, it's a fun little fight, but it's not researched well for your side, I'm afraid. So yeah, my final verdict is, in my opinion, it's like a 5 out of 10 episode. It's not great, it's not horrible. And most Hulk people, most like super Hulk fans' opinions is probably going to be a lot higher. And most hardcore Godzilla fans, or potentially Glazers' opinions, is probably like a 0 out of 10. I don't think it's horrible. I think they gave Godzilla more than I was actually expecting them to, due to how Death Battle scales characters. They definitely gave Hulk more than I thought they were going to off their last 2 showings with the character. But I just feel that people they miss what people are trying to say when they say Godzilla wasn't done justice here, because a lot of people bring up the argument like, well, Hulk wasn't done justice the last 2 times, so he deserved this win. No one's saying he was done justice the last 2 times. It's possible to have a character get screwed in 2 fights and then not get screwed in the last fight, but the other character gets screwed over. That's not like it's impossible for that to happen. That's exactly what happened here. Hulk fans get really defensive really quick, and I don't understand why. It's like, you won the fight. Why are you the one that's angry? You're taking Hulk's advice a little too seriously there. Regardless, yeah, that's my opinions on this death battle. I'll be making a full video on how I view the season so far, because this season has been so hit or miss. It's kind of like astronomically insane to me how they managed to do that. So I'll probably be releasing that soon. It'll probably be longer than this one, and this one's already pretty long. But yeah, that was me yapping about a death battle. Yeah, if you somehow liked this form of content, please consider liking and subscribing, and I'll see you people in the next one. Bye.